every Monday and Thursday, I listen to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, former NFL general manager. And yesterday was starting to get a little uncomfortable because his co-host, Femi Abebefe, is a Cowboy fan, and Michael was defending the decision to bring back McCarthy, which, of course, basically everyone in the Metroplex has been against, and we all melted down yesterday. And I was like, you know what? We got to balance things out here. We got to do good radio. I always love having Lombardi on, so I asked Pepe to reach out, and he is now joining us on the D&M Leasing Hotline, author of Gridiron Genius, Football Done Right, former NFL GM. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I am good. Yes, Femi was off the ledge, as most Cowboy fans are, demanding heads to be chopped. He was like Uncle Junior in Sopranos. He wanted discipline to be handed out immediately, so I had to talk him down.
Okay, I think today could get a little contentious, so I'm just prepping you.
Hey, let me say this to you really clearly. When you work for Al Davis, like, seriously, if you work for Al Davis, you don't even understand what contentious is. Like, these Twitter idiots that come at you, like, yeah, you're going to have to come heavy or don't come at all, because when you've been in a room with Al Davis, and none of these idiots who are experts have and have gone through what I've gone through in my career, it doesn't make me smarter than anybody. It just makes me a hell of a lot tougher. So you can bring it all you want.
But, when you do the Al Davis impression, whenever I hear the voice, it doesn't sound like too nasty, Like I'm always chuckling at it, but maybe he's just saying really mean things like Jerry in an accent.
No, he's really smart. You can't BS him, and he is always thinking ahead, and he never asked a question that he didn't know the answer to. So you were always in a situation where you had to defend yourself. He would call me every morning at 10:30, and there was never hello. Never hello. It was, I got three things for you right now, young man. And then he would start. And then if I said to him I had to look something up, he said, he was to drop the F-bomb, and, I could look it up. Why am I calling you then? And then we go from there.
Okay, why do you think Jerry made the right call in bringing McCarthy back?
Well, it's a good segue right from Al. When look, let's be clear here. As you get older in life, change is harder for most of us, right? I'm not as old as Jerry, but as you get older, you don't really like the change. You kind of like your routine, your structure, your kind of environment. And I think everybody thinks Jerry at 83 is in a sense of desperation. I want to win, I want to win, I want to win. Time's running out on me. And I thought the other way completely, because when you're older, you don't want as much change. And so what I feel like Jerry sat down and said, look, this coach has won, he's won more games than any coach. He's got the best winning percentage of any Cowboy coach. He's been to the playoffs 3 years that he's been here. He's got a record similar to John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh's 160-99, one Super Bowl, 11-9 playoff wins. McCarthy's 167-102, 11-11 with one Super Bowl win. He's better than Sean Payton. He's slightly better. He's not as good as Tomlin in terms of wins. He's 6 wins behind Tomlin, but Tomlin's playoff record is two games below 500. So he's sitting here with a coach who can stack up, and he's saying, like, why am I going to listen to all these people that want me? My quarterback had one of his best seasons. After all of you scream, all of you, now stand up and take accountability for this. Because when Kellen Moore left, the whole Metroplex was in tears. True. All of you were, including you two, right? Yep. You guys, I had to talk you off the ledge on that one, right? Like, you were all in tears. You were losing the guru of gurus. You were losing joystick, and you were going to completely the meltdown, that this was the worst play caller in the history of football. And yet he came out and had the best offense you've had in 3 years.
Yes.
So, like, Jerry's got that. So now I thought they did a horrible job preparing the team for the Packer game. Granted, they weren't ready. I think they didn't understand how good the Packers were. I think they got taken off guard. I think the defense was as much to blame. But I think, to me, there's some things that are really good at what they've done. And so when you're 83 years old, you'd rather repair than replace. And so Jerry's challenge, along with Steven and Will McClay, is we got to figure out where we are. One big misconception is they didn't underachieve. This is not a talented team. I mean, they've got some really talented players. But when they go on the road, their offensive line gets exposed, right? The right tackle has a tough time blocking. Smith, the left tackle, is hurt all the time, not always playing well, right? They really missed another back to go along. Pollard was not the same player this year off the injury that he was last year.
Yep.
Fact.
Yep.
Lamb's tremendous. Okay, so there's some problems there. Defensively, they didn't have any linebackers, right? They lose their best cover guy. Gilmore's not the same player. Bland can intercept passes. He's just not a very good man-to-man player. And so, like, tell me why they're so talented. I mean, so I think to me, the fans have this expectation when the reality is something different. And I think Jerry did the right thing. Now, you know, he's going to have to repair some things. There's no question. But to change, going back to 83 and changing, it's hard. And so he brings in a coach like Bill, who I love tremendously, who is the best coach I've ever been around. But Bill's going to want to do things a lot differently than they do them now in Dallas. And maybe that's not the right thing for them to currently.
That's a great answer.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the talent, and that's something we kind of touched on earlier today. Why then is the common perception that the talent on this team is very, very good? Where is the sort of discrepancy?
With 12-win
Can I
record.
answer that?
Yes.
Well, I mean, they won games. There's no question. You know, but look, did you see what J.J. Watt said on McAfee's show the other day, where he said that, you know, he's been in meetings where, you know, they put the Pro Football Focus grade up there and the coaches laugh at it?
Yeah.
I think there's a misconception that first of all, we're not educating the fans on the game itself. You know, everybody's great. We're all going to Dairy Queen after the game. Everybody's wonderful. There's nobody bad. Everything's just tremendous. Like, at some point, don't we get some kind of critique, some analyst? I mean, Jonathan Hankins was the Raiders didn't want him. Now, okay, he helps them. You know, Maisie Smith hasn't come through, really. I mean, maybe he will next year. But when you break down their team, man for man, if they were so dominant, why did they give up 35 points to Seattle, right? You know, so, like, to me, like, you have to be the hardest thing to do in sports. And this goes back to the great Al Davis. When I used to get on the team airplane, after a win or a loss, I had to walk over to him, and he would be sitting there. And he'd say, do you know why we won today? Or do you know why the F we lost today? And if I gave him a bad answer, I would get destroyed. And if you can't figure out why you win and why you lose, then you're in trouble. And most fans think, well, we lost because McCarthy's a bad coach. I don't think that. I think McCarthy could use some help in some areas. There's no question. We all could. Nobody's perfect. But that's not the reason they lost. I think there's other layers to this.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I touched on a lot of those roster things to start the show. Here are my problems with Mike's teams. They're always penalized. I mean, they play a lot of stupid football. You want to put that on the players, that's fine. There's always some details, clock management stuff. As you've detailed, that is a league-wide problem. They're definitely not tough enough when they match up against these power teams, and they didn't beat the good teams this year. They were 0 for 4, 0 for 5 against the better teams on their schedule. Those are my problems with Mike's teams.
All fair criticisms, but let's understand how that is, okay? So let's take the Philadelphia Eagles, who looked like they hadn't practiced at the second half of the season, who looked out of shape. You see, what's going on in the league right now is the head coach doesn't necessarily have complete control over how he practices his team. The head coach doesn't have complete control over driving it and attention to detail, right? We have become a league of, well, everybody, you know, we don't want to hold everybody accountable. We don't want to make everybody upset. And if you do, then the players complain, right? I mean, and so this is where we are. I was talking to a former head coach the other day, and we were both, you know, like, let me say this very clearly. To win a championship today is the same formula to win a championship 40 years ago. It takes accountability. It takes attention to detail. It takes discipline. It takes buy-in from the players. But when you have a lot of people meddling and you have an analytics people coming in and say, well, we need to rest the players today. We need to take the day off. You know, we can't do this. And you have a strength and condition. We don't want to work them too hard. We don't want to do this. All of a sudden, rules become lax. Things become a little bit lesser. And I don't disagree with your criticism that the attention to detail is missing. But sometimes I think it could be the structure of the organization as much as it is the head coach. Now, if Bill walked in there, Bill's not going to let the personnel, he's not going to let the analytical guys say, well, we need to rest the players. Philadelphia, their strength, they have different colors of when they're going to practice. They don't practice. That's the problem. They don't practice. They can't tackle. They're out of shape. They make mistakes because they're trying to rest their players to get ready for the game when we know practice execution becomes game reality.
Michael Lombardi, host of the GM Shuffle podcast, joined us here at 105.3 The Fan. The 3 straight 12-win seasons with the same quarterback, I mean, bad quarterbacks don't win 12 games 3 years in a row. Where are you on Dak? Do you consider him someone that is a championship caliber player? Would you sign him to an extension or let him play out the final year?
Look, I think Dak's a good player. I think the system has allowed Dak to make a lot of money, and that's not Dak's fault, right? Because the fundamental question is if we don't have him, what are we going to do, right? Where are we if we don't have him? And if you don't draft one every year and prepare yourself to say no to a contract, he's got you trapped. It's checkmate. But here's what I've always said about Dak. I've always said this about Dak. If you're going to go and let him throw it 40 times, you're probably not going to be the best team you can be. See, I think the biggest mistake the Cowboys made, and Zeke wasn't a great player, but they didn't have a power back this year. Like, they needed another guy to go with Pollard. And then with Pollard not being the same guy, that really affected them. And so they were 8th in, passing attempts this year. 8th. Now, they had a lead in a lot of games. And if you're 8th in passing attempts, you're throwing it way too much. Because usually the formula for great football is you throw it early to get the lead and you run it to keep the lead. So there's that. You start out in the first quarter with a lot of throws. Second quarter, it goes a little lower. Third quarter, it's lower. And fourth quarter, it's less. But they can't really run the ball or get control of the line of scrimmage, partly because their offensive line isn't nearly as good as it once was, okay? And they didn't have a back that really they could rely on. And so there was a little bit of an imbalance, so they worked around it. They threw bubbles, they threw the ball. But it's dangerous when you get into that situation and you're trying to offset a problem. It's a little bit like Curly in the boat. Remember in the Three Stooges? Curly's sitting in a boat. There's they make a hole in the boat, so Curly drills another hole in the boat to let the water from the one hole out. You're just creating more problems when you do this. And so that's where it gets to. And I think that's ultimately one of the things. And so as you sit there as an executive, you're Will McClay, you got to decide, is it production? Is it a production problem, meaning do we not have the right players? Or is it a design problem, meaning we're not putting the players in the right spot? I think a lot of the issues with Dallas this year was labeled on production. There wasn't any good linebackers. The lack of depth within the team becomes a problem. So, you can't blame everything on McCarthy. That's the thing. You just can't.
Mike, how big of a loss do you think Dan Quinn would be? And as a general manager, how scary is it to bring in his replacement with Mike's quote-unquote lame duck status?
I don't think – look, first of all, you got to understand, when you go to the Cowboys, if you're a good coach, Jerry's not going to let you go, okay? So you're working for the Cowboys. You're not tied to a coach. Yeah. So if Quinn leaves and takes the Seattle job, okay – and they bring Mike Zimmer back. Let's say they do that. Or they hire Don Martindale, right? Jerry and Steven and Will, they're smart enough to know, we got a good coach, why would we let him go?
Yeah.
Why would we let him go? So there's really that lame duck stuff is ridiculous because it doesn't mean anything. When you have an owner who's in control of the organization like Jerry and Steven are, then you know that you work for them and that your job is to do a great job. See, this is the NFL today. This is what's really been missing in the NFL is there's only 2 people in the organization. There's only 2 people that are paid to win, the head coach and the general manager. Everybody else can be good at their jobs and get head coaching jobs. Look at Quinn. Quinn's got 4 interviews. His defense was atrocious on Sunday.
Yeah.
Now, I think Dan's a hell of a guy, and I think he's a great coach. And one game doesn't make a career. But the reality of it is everybody's looking at that. Nobody paid attention to that game. They hired him. The offensive coordinator of the Eagles, he has 2 interviews for head coaching job. Did anybody watch that offense? Of course, and he's got 2 interviews for head coaching jobs. So my point is simply this. is if you don't understand that as a head coach and as a general manager, then you're going to get behind. And you got to be demanding of the staff because they're all going to be able to get jobs somewhere else.
Michael Lombardi, former NFL GM on the D&M Leasing Hotline. So you are Will McClay, you're Steven, you're Jerry, you're McCarthy, and you do the season after meeting. You're heading into the offseason and the draft. What are you writing down on the whiteboard for team needs and areas of improvement?
Well, I think we got to get better on defense. I think there's no question. We got to get linebackers. We got to be able to run. And if we lose Quinn, we got to be able to bring somebody in who can highlight the skill set of Parsons in unique different ways on the first level and on the second level. I think Parsons, when he is playing all over the field as an inside linebacker to a down rusher, he's more deadly. He's really an incredible fifth rusher. And what a fifth rusher means, if you rush four and then he fits on the rush where he's unaccounted for from one side to the other, then he becomes a problem. When you line him up at right ends, let's say, they can chip him, they know where he is, they can put a double team on him, he becomes lesser of effective. Where when you move him around and you have no idea where he's coming from, he does that. So I would be really concerned about who was going to come in if somebody had to replace him. We got to get much better in the front. We got to really get better in the offensive line. And we got to find a running back, and I don't certainly want to pay for one, but we got to find a running back that can do it. And we're going to have to give up some players here. We got to sign Lamb, right? We got to get him signed to a contract, and we got to sign Parsons. So we know we're going to have to rely on a lot of young players. And that's the one thing about McCarthy that you have to understand. When he was in Green Bay, you know, he didn't care about the draft. He just coached the team. Ted Thompson ran the draft. And Mike always was stuck with – Ted Thompson never made a trade. He never signed free agents, okay? Never – I think Woodson might have been his only free agent he signed. And so they relied on the college draft and college free agency. And that's what you're going to have. And so Mike's going to have to handle that. You're going to have to play some young players, but they got to get better in both lines.
Your thoughts on, it sounds like, if I remember correctly, listen to the pod, you always laughed off the notion that Sirianni could or should go. Your thoughts on Sirianni's status and the Philly collapse?
Well, I mean, Philly collapse is, to me, a lot due to organizational collapse. Like, I don't know if it's Sirianni as much as anything, but I think, again, I'll give you an Al Davis quote. He used to say, the secret to greatness in all organizations are the ability to anticipate problems, not react to it. In 2014, Belichick and I sat in a room in San Diego. We're getting ready to play the Chargers. We just lost to the Packers in Green Bay. We flew to San Diego that night after the game. That week, we spent all that week going over what we had to do, how we had to fix our team to be able to make a playoff run, a Super Bowl run. And then we also prepared for what was going to be the 2015 team. And so I think oftentimes teams don't do that. You don't fix the problems internally as the season goes along. You wait too late. Now, sometimes there's no solutions, and it's hard to do it. But to me, I think what Sirianni did was never recognize the problem. You know, they were winning games. There's three kind of games that you win, all right? The first kind of game you win is called dominating win. You dominate the game. The second kind is dictating wins, and that's where you dictated the game at the end. You kind of found a way to dictate the game. And the third win is a dangerous win, where things just went right for you. The Eagles didn't have any dominating wins since the Tampa game in week 3. And so he never really recognized his problems. And he had an older team that wasn't able to practice. They didn't practice. There was no attention to detail. And their offense was atrocious. They couldn't block a blitz to save their life. And so my question is, if I'm Jeff Lurie, is Nick, if you're an offensive guru, if we hired you for your offensive acumen, why couldn't you fix this problem? And now how are you going to fix it next year? And I think that answer is going to determine whether he comes back or not.
Now that I have to watch all these other coaches who I think, you know, could establish a more hard-ass culture, go interview elsewhere, just give me your thoughts on other potential matches and fits. Why would Belichick maybe work in Atlanta, Vrabel, Harbaugh, guys that were on Cowboy fans' wish lists?
Well, I think, look, you know, the one thing about Belichick you have to understand is Bill is a great coach, but Bill needs to have the ability to establish his culture. Bill's not power hungry; he's culture hungry, and so Bill needs the foundation to establish it. He doesn't need anybody interfering with him. And if he takes the job in Atlanta, he's going to have the runway to do what he wants to do, to hold players accountable, to not have players that are going to go to the owner and complain about it's too hard to practice, he's working us too hard, all that stuff. Because that's when you upset the culture. So I think all these guys are specific to culture. Same thing with Vrabel. Same thing with Harbaugh. I mean, Harbaugh's the CEO of Michigan football. Nobody tells him what to do with his team at Michigan. So if he goes into the league, you think he's going to take a job where somebody's going to talk about, you need to do this, you need to do that? Bill Walsh used to say this all the time. He used to say, when the coaches, he told me this at a very young age, he hated scouts. Hated scouts. And I was a scout, but I drove him around. So he always he didn't want me to be a scout. He wanted me to be a football man. And so he would tell me all the time, he said, the thing that drives me crazy about this league is a bunch of these bad coaches become scouts. And they start telling good coaches what to do. And they're sitting with the owner. They're going out to dinner with the owner. It's always the players aren't getting coached well enough. And so I think you have to have an organization that doesn't have that dynamic to it. And I think all these three guys, that they can't have that. They can't have that. Vrabel's a good coach. He's going to come in and do the right thing. He's going to make the team better. He's going to hold them accountable if the system within he's coming into will allow that.